All right, welcome back to Wednesday night Bible study. We are getting into some fun stuff here in Galatians chapter 5, kind of some of the famous passages when you think of like the fruits of the Spirit. We're going to get to that next week, but here is the front end of the fruit of the Spirit that maybe we don't focus on as much. So let us dig into Galatians. All right, and so in Galatians chapter 5, verse 16, this is how it begins. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing the things that you want to do. All right, and so he's clearly setting up this dichotomy of either following the Spirit, and it has results, or following the flesh with its results. And so this is a common kind of writing style of Paul in that he is, lays out what he's about to say. It's like a thesis statement. I'm going to talk about the Spirit and what it gets, and the flesh and what it gets, and what it results in. And so, and that's what he's going to do in these next two sections. Today we'll look at what the fruits of the flesh produce, and then next week what the fruits of the Spirit produce. All right, but before we get there, he makes this little mention here in verse 18, but if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. He is just reiterating things he's been saying the last, few chapters, that if you are truly in the Spirit, you aren't under the letter of the law, the obligation of the law. So the way we talked about this before is, if you're following the Spirit, he's not leading you to murder. If you're following the Spirit, he's not leading you to stealing or sexual immorality or other things that break the law. It's not the fact that they're breaking the law, because you can not easily, but you can obey the law, but not necessarily be following God. There were Pharisees that in many ways were following the law, but were far from God. All right, and so here God is saying, I hope you understand, if you're following the Spirit, you're not under the law. But that doesn't mean that there isn't sin anymore. It doesn't mean there isn't disobedience anymore. And he shows the things. How do we know if we don't have the law anymore? How do we know if we're being obedient to the flesh or being obedient to God? And he says, well, it's really easy. It's the outcome. If these are the things you see in your life, you know you're following your flesh. On the flip side, next week, if you're following the Spirit, these are the evidences you're going to see. So it's giving us a tool to see without the clarity of the law that simply says don't do certain things. But the law is imperfect when it comes to, well, does that mean I'm following God? If you aren't committing sexual immorality and you're not murdering, does that mean you're following God? Of course not. You could be abstinent in some way and not a murderer. There's a lot of non-believers that aren't murderers. And so just because you're being obedient to the law does not mean you're following God. But if you're following God, you end up being obedient to the law. And so this is why he's saying follow the Spirit, not the law, the Spirit. All right, and the way to know whether or not you are is going to be in the resulting actions. So here, verse 19, the works of the flesh are evident. All right, so if you are walking in the flesh, if you are gratifying the desires of the flesh, these are the results. The works of the flesh are evident. All right, and I'm going to read through them quickly, but then I'm going to go back and break them down a little bit. Sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. All right, and so in this, I actually see a breakdown a little bit of what he lists. Now, it certainly doesn't list every sin imaginable. He kind of put things in a couple groupings. One of the things when I think about sin is it is us trying to take control over an aspect of our life. We are saying, I'm not trusting God in this area. I want control. I'm not being obedient to God in this area. I'm not willing to wait on God in this area. I want to act the way I want to act. And so the first couple things we see, sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, is these are sins that when you want control over your own sexuality. I want control over my pleasure. I want that control. And whether that comes in the form of sexual morality or impurity or pornography, fornication, adultery, whatever form it comes in, it's saying, I want control over my life. I want control over specifically my sexual pleasure. All right. And so I don't trust God for that. I want the control. When we get to idolatry and sorcery, it's saying, I want control over my own power. Idolatry is all about, I will turn from God and worship another God if it gives me what I want. Now, nowadays, a lot of times it's in the form of money or something like that, where we are worshiping, this something else. We are trusting in money over God to take care of the problems in our life. All right. And so that's how it can become an idol. But anything can become, we can have a spouse can become an idol. A child can become an idol. Anything that is taking the place of God can become an idol. But it's basically saying, I want the power that object, that created thing has. I want what it has over what God is willing to provide me. Now, sorcery is really the same kind of thing. It's enacting power, whether from the universe or whatever else, that you are seeking control over things you're not supposed to have control over. All right, where we are asked to trust God when it comes to many things that are out of our control. Sorcery is all about, I'm taking control of the power that I don't want to entrust to God. As he goes on to say, enmity and strife and jealousy and fits of anger and rivalries, dissension, division, envy. All right, these are all control over relationships. When we want to control other people, how they act, what they do, what they say, how they say it, when they say it. When we try to control other people's action, this is what it results in. Fighting, jealousy, rage, anger. It can manifest itself in several different ways, but it's all from the same root of not trusting God to do a work in other people. I have to control other people. I have to get people to do. And a lot of times it can be with this really good motive. We have this, I don't want them to act that way anymore. That's sinful. And so I'm going to act in a controlling way to get them to do what I want them to do. I can manipulate them. And when we do that, it causes all this strife and anger and enmity. And so when we aren't praying for people, but instead are trying to control people, all right, these are the sinful results that can occur. And lastly, he brings up drunkenness and orgies and things like these. All right, so this is, again, wanting control over pleasure, enjoyment. We almost have a sickness in our heads where we think that the only thing that will be really fun would be partying and, drugs and drinking and all this other stuff. That's what we, the world views as that's what's fun. And then when we're a believer, we're but we can't do those things. Now, if you've ever been involved in anything like that, or, at the end of the night, the next morning when there's this massive hangover and there's all these consequences, all of a sudden it didn't seem worth it. But in the moment, it seemed fun. And we are a slave to hedonism, to fun. All right. And the idea of, I'm willing to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, for a moment, and ignore the consequences that come from sinful actions. All right. If you don't learn from that behavior, you're going to get trapped in a cycle of, addiction and death and destruction. All right. But sin results itself when we want control over, I want to dictate my enjoyment, my pleasure on my terms. That we're not thinking in terms of others. We're certainly not thinking in terms of God. All right, and now the warning in all this at the end here, the warning is, I warn you, as I warn you before God, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Now, that's certainly a scary sentence, because we're uh-oh, so you're saying if I've done any sexual immorality or idolatry or envy or jealousy, if I've done anything, drunkenness, if I've ever done that, I'm exempt from the kingdom of God? Well, we certainly know it can't mean that, because we certainly see that God saves us from sins, and these are all sins we've committed in the past. So we certainly don't want to say that oh, you can't be saved, or you lose your salvation or something like that. I think what I would say, the way I would look at this is that those who do such things, and this is like this, if this is your actions, if I saw someone that their actions were one of continual sexual immorality or idolatry or envy, whatever it might be, if these are things you do, active word, do, not have done, but do, it does make me question someone's salvation. It should get you to question your salvation. It's not saying you're not saved. It's getting you to question, why am I doing these things? When you're dealing with some sort of, struggle and sin, there should be this, why am I struggling with this? Why is this a problem? Why am I still dealing with this? Am I not saved? And if you come to the result like, no, I'm saved. I've put my faith and trust in Jesus Christ. I trust him and him alone. Okay, I've got to start acting that way. I've got to start running from these things. I'm clearly not filling my heart and mind and desires with the things of the Spirit. I'm clearly filling my mind, my heart, my desires, my eyes with the things of the flesh. And then this is the results coming from that. So I've got to starve the flesh and fill in the Spirit. So it is meant to be a scary warning. You don't have a place in the kingdom of God. So it shouldn't be this flippancy that we see sometimes. I'm like, just ask forgiveness. God's not giving that out. If you do such things, you're not inheriting the kingdom of God. All right? It is a harsh warning that you should take note of. But again, I don't want you to think of this in terms of, if I've ever done this in the past, or I make a bad choice and slip up and sin in some way, that I've lost my place in the kingdom. Certainly other verses say otherwise. But if we're continually doing something, that would be an indication that we're not really a believer. I got a couple simple questions for you. I will write those in the description. God bless everyone. Talk to you soon.